Welcome to Pathways, a career podcast from the Idaho State University Career Center. I'm your host, Mark Beaver. Today we're talking with Leif Tapanila, professor of geosciences at Idaho State University and director of the Idaho Museum of Natural History. Leif's pathway to here was always fairly straight ahead. However, it's always been informed by his passions and a pretty pivotal moment of figuring out what really drives him at a foundational level. Please sit back and enjoy our conversation with Leif. Hey Leif, how are you doing today?
You know, it's a great day today.
It is. It's a beautiful day. So, Leif, I often go into the Idaho Museum of Natural History with my 2.5-year-old son and wife. And when I walk around there, I think to myself, whoever gets to do this most have the most fun job on campus.
Well, okay, so like a museum is, I've been going to museums my whole life, right? Art museums, natural history museums, every kind of museum you can think of. Since I was a little kid, my parents always brought me to museums. It's one of my favorite places to go. I get to work there every day of the week, and it's still, I get a big supercharge out of going into the exhibit hall, seeing kids and their parents discovering things and interacting with each other. I love teaching, but when you go downstairs into the collections, into the vault, I realize like how special a position I have and the people I get to work with have in taking care of Idaho's treasures, really. It doesn't get old.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I was hoping you were going to say it is as fun as you think it is.
It is.
But there has to be a little bit more. So can you tell me about, you actually have a couple positions here. Could you tell me what are those positions and what is like a snapshot into that position?
Okay, so I'm a professor of geosciences. And in particular, my specialty is working with fossils. So I'm a paleontologist. I'm a professional paleontologist. And that's part one of my job. And for being a professor, there are three things that we do as professors. One is we teach classes at the university level. Second, we do research, our own research. So I study a variety of fossils and create new knowledge, hopefully, out of that. And then the third thing I do is various service tasks within the university, helping out on committees or that sort of thing. So those are the three components of a professor's job. But I am also, the other half of me is the director of the Idaho Museum of Natural History. And director is the top management position in a museum. And they're in charge of, or I'm in charge of making sure that we have a budget, that we have financing and resources. I oversee and manage the staff that we have and the students that work in our museum. And I make sure that the lights are on and that the dishes are clean and that the fossils are where they belong. That's the big job there.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit when we opened up, but what is it about these jobs that you really love, strictly from like a work aspect, something like that gives you fulfillment and like an actual working day-to-day aspect?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I'm what you might consider a mid-career person. So I've been working as a professor for 16 years now, directing for about 6 years. I'm into my career some years. And when I made the transition from being a professor to being a professor as well as a manager, a director, I was asking myself that question of like, what is it that I really love?
Yeah.
I love problem solving. I think that's what it comes down to. So whether I'm being a researcher and I'm trying to solve some kind of problem with fossils, it's problem solving. If I'm in the museum and I'm helping make an exhibit, figuring out how to communicate certain ideas to the public, that's problem solving. Working on the manager side, working with staff and trying to resolve conflict, that's problem solving. I think when it comes down to it, one of the core things that makes me really happy is to be able to attempt to solve problems. And it just so happens that I'm doing that in fossils in research, or I just happen to be doing that in a museum. But I could be doing this probably in a variety of other types of jobs, as long as I was satisfying my need to solve problems and feel confident that I was capable of doing so.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. Especially that you realize that about yourself. That is something I think we often refer to in kind of like career services world as like a transferable skill, maybe. So it's something that can be applied to any type of job. like you just said. I mean, that need to solve problems could take place in a business setting, certainly in an educational setting, and more like an engineering type setting, really any job. But it's also something that is like a personal interest to you. Something kind of drives you on the day to day. I think it's amazing that you figured that out as you were thinking about making that big transition, about like, why would I actually do this?
Well, it came not immediately to me. There was a point in my career where I was a professor and heavily focused on the research side of the job and loving that very much. But in order to become the director of a museum, I had to give up a certain amount of that research. And I love doing research. Not only is it problem solving, but often especially in my field, I'm discovering something new.
Yeah.
So I go out in the field, as we say. We go outside, we visit some rocks, we try to find fossils in the wild, so to speak, treasures that are buried in the hills. And there's an excitement to that. There's an excitement to bringing those fossils back and studying them and coming up with something new that no one's been able to say before about some fossil. And I was worried at the time, like, if I'm going to give that kind of excitement up, am I going to be satisfied in a management position where I know I have to give up a certain amount of that research? There was a little period of unease until I started figuring out and asking those questions of like, really, what does it come down to in essence that I really am driven by? And it's problem solving. I think also because I'm a teacher, one of the things early on in my life that I really gravitated toward is understanding things to the point where I could explain it to someone else. And there's something about that transferal of knowledge that it tickles me. It makes me excited. And so I knew from a very, very early age that I was going to be a teacher. Yeah. I didn't know what, but I knew I'd teach.
That's amazing. I mean, especially in the sciences, science communication is such a necessary part of the job, right?
We have our own language, don't we?
I know we do. And I mean, I say we, but really you. Yeah, being able to say that in a way that everyone can understand, I mean, on so many different levels is important. We're seeing this kind of play out in, over the past few years with all of a sudden we're in a pandemic and we've educated, a better part of the world on virology and, all these kind of complex medical things that we might not have thought about before. And I mean, I just think about both where communication could be better, so we wouldn't have had to have so many of the hiccups along the way,
right? But
also just some of the amazing things that I've seen come out where I myself, with a fairly strong science background, have kind of had like those like, oh, that's how it all works. Oh, that's kind of like, it almost like, it makes me feel at ease, to like have someone explain something to me that there's no way I could have comprehended if I were to just read it out of a textbook. That obviously happens a lot just in the context of a museum. That's a lot of what you're doing, correct? You were doing it as a teacher, but in a museum, that's basically what you're doing, is trying to bring these awesome, complex things and present them in a way that anyone can kind of see them relatably and understand their importance and their significance.
That is the name of the game, really. Like the primary role of a museum to the public. We collect fossils, we collect artifacts and preserve them for as long as we possibly can, but it's in the service of educating, right? That's why we keep these things, so that we can tell those stories. So my earlier phase of career where it was, writing research papers to an audience of 100 specialists in the world that understand the language I'm using, to what I'm primarily doing today as a science communicator through a museum is quite different. And so the world is a complicated place. And if you really want to get into the weeds, there's a base of knowledge that you have to accumulate. And for, I would say, the average person, they might not have the time or the bandwidth or the interest to have all of those components to build up. But you can still communicate what might be complicated situations or phenomena, but be able to relate them in a way that not only can they just understand it, but maybe can engage with it, observe it themselves, and really see how it impacts them in their daily life, as opposed to being some esoteric or theoretical thing that a few eggheads in a university care about. So, and that to me, about problem solving, that is like the most challenging, but also most rewarding part of the job. Is like when you get that moment of aha from somebody that's in an exhibit or somebody in a public lecture that you're giving, and you're connecting with them, and they're making a realization that's new to them, and you see that light bulb go off. There is a chemical that drips in the back of my brain that makes me extremely happy and makes me want to keep doing it, right?
Yeah. And I was going to say, as far as problem solving that gap of communicating those complex ideas in relatable language, that's got to feel like a great problem solve. Like you just said, it almost gives you a buzz. We often talk to our students and to anyone who's kind of thinking about a new career about not solely focusing on the job itself, but also what else do you have in your life that this job is going to kind of help you achieve? So for your jobs, Leif, what outside of work, what do these jobs allow you to do where you can find fulfillment outside of work?
Yeah, so that one I think most easily is captured in the kind of, especially the field-based research that I was doing and still do to a lesser degree, is being outside. Yeah. And being in nature. So I'm lucky to have a job as a geologist, as a field paleontologist, to be a professional camper. So a number of months out of the year, certainly when I was really active, it would be 3 months out of the year, I would be paid by my job to go and camp out in the middle of nowhere and hike mountains and go find rocks and understand them and bring them home. And so I seriously would log 2 to 3 months in Africa or in Europe or in Canada or a lot of the time in Western United States in my little tent and hiking every day with my students and finding rocks and telling stories off of those rocks. That extends beyond the job. It's super fulfilling. It becomes, it's work, yes. There's a seriousness that goes into research for sure, but it's, for me personally, it's deeply fulfilling the more days I can log where I'm under the roof of the sky as opposed to the roof of a building. And so that for me was a big draw into the discipline and allowed me to fulfill a need I have of being connected to nature while also working.
Yeah. Have you always had that? Did you grow up like camping, outdoors type activities?
I grew up in Canada, in a part of Canada where very similar to Idaho, as soon as you get out of the city proper, you're in the wilderness right away. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that Pocatello feels very familiar to me. And so when I was growing up, we would always have a couple week-long camping adventures somewhere not too far away, nothing too exotic, but it always got us out. And it was a routine that my parents would establish of, we're going to go out camping. This is the week in the summer that we're going to do it here, and here's a week we're going to do it there. And being in nature and smelling the pine trees and getting out on a lake, we were in a land of many, many lakes, and getting chewed to death by mosquitoes, that to me is life. That's what you should be doing. And so this was a seed that was planted very early, and it's very much part of who I am these days. Yeah.
Yeah, great. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Leif Tapanila. He's a professor of geosciences here at Idaho State University and the director of the Idaho Museum of Natural History. So Leif, you talked a little bit about how you said when you were growing up, you went to a lot of museums. And then you also just told me how you spent a lot of time outside as well. So I can already see how these influences, they've had foundations in your life forever. Can you remember when you were a kid, what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah. So when I was growing up in Canada, as I like to say, my parents were both community college teachers, professors in a community college setting, and they were both artists, fine artists, one a sculptor, one a painter. And so teaching was the profession in the household. And I would help them grading on Saturday mornings when they had their artwork spread out on the floor, and I'd be in there with them, trying to understand how they evaluate things. So from birth, I knew I was going to be a teacher, pretty much. It was in the background all the time. I was in museums all the time because they're fine artists, and they were in the museums all the time hanging their students' artwork. And when we went traveling anywhere, we went to museums. That's just what our family would do. So those seeds were planted very, very early. In terms of what I thought my career was going to be in grade school, in grade 6 or 7, I had determined I was going to be a mathematician because I was really good at math. At that level, I was outstanding at that math, and that was my North Star. I was going to be probably a math teacher until grade 10 math. And I had a teacher who, let's just say, was not the best teacher ever. And it kind of turned me off of math, which at that impressionable age, I think that kind of thing happens a lot. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there was a great biology teacher. And I took her class and got totally hooked on biology. And I made this pivot in grade 10, 11 of math, maybe no. I'm going to be a biology teacher. And that led me into my undergraduate program to get a biology degree so that I could teach probably at a high school level. That was the plan.
Yeah, that's funny that you were so into math because, I mean, what aligns better with a problem solving?
Exactly. Yeah,
that's all it
is.
It's
literal problem solving.
Yeah, that's all, just one problem after another.
Yep. And I was good at it.
Yeah, sure. I think I also was good at math until I hit high school. I wonder if when I diverged from math, which I did pretty sharply around grade 10, 11.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was the teacher that I had wasn't as engaged with the class that year, or if the math just kind of got into a different realm, right? And so I don't know exactly what it was, but I kind of went the other route too. I really kind of invested myself in the sciences, in biological sciences, and then actually, talking about like having like one of those classes or one of those teachers, that really makes you understand the power of teaching. I had like one sociology class my freshman year of college, and it just blew my mind. That
opened the door. Right?
Yeah. And so then I moved pretty sharply into social sciences. Actually, it was kind of out of the biological sciences. I mean, because I'd never really been exposed to it.
And you came into your undergrad in biology, is that true?
Yeah.
And so you were on a path, and then you got rerouted, if you will, on that path. So that's exactly my experience. Yeah. So I got into the biology degree at the University of Waterloo in Southern Ontario. I'm going to be a biology teacher. That's in my head. Mm-hmm. And so I get into the 4-year program, and I take a geology class. And I had one of the best professors I've ever had in my life in a university situation teach that class. And he looked like Father Time. He had the gray hair, gray beard. He's almost like a cartoon of what the classic geology professor is supposed to be. And he gave the best lectures because not only was the material interesting, but every lecture was him showing pictures of him in the field on a live volcano, or him in the field on a delta. So he was showing his experience of the material that he was teaching. And that just like, oh my God, you can do that?
It made it so tangible.
It was tangible. He was a great storyteller. And then it's like, now I got a choice to make because geo is pretty interesting and I still love bio. And I'm pretty good at both of them. What if you could combine those two? I had that like great idea in my second year of undergrad. And that's paleontology. Oh. So I started taking paleo classes and then realized, damn, I really like this paleo stuff.
How did you figure that out on your own? That was kind of where the Venn diagram of those two matches up, or did you have some?
No, that was I kind of looking back on this is really strange in thinking about it. But yes, I came up to that realization on my own of like, I like this geology thing, and I already know I like biology. What if there's a thing that combines those? And I seriously, like, of course it's paleontology. Every 5-year-old knows that. I probably knew that as a 5-year-old. But I had to relearn that when I was in my lower 20s to figure out like, that maybe is where I belong. And then I looked in the course catalog and I saw, there's a paleontologist here. I'd never met her. And so I took two of her courses and another course by a fellow who's teaching vertebrate paleontology. And it opened my eyes to like, oh, there's a career called a paleontologist. Yeah. Maybe I want to do that. And so it was just, I don't know if I'm just really dense. I kind of think maybe I'm a little dense sometimes because there's these possibilities that everyone else seems to be aware of. And then I have to realize it myself and come to some grand conclusion myself that this field exists, which of course it's existed now for like 200 years. But it was news to me in my second year of undergrad that like, oh, you can combine those. And that turned out to be just like so eye-popping to me and motivating and led me down the path that, leads to where I am now.
Right. To kind of take that step too. I mean, not only to kind of make that realization, which, I mean, it's amazing that you made that realization, whether or not, you're dense and everyone else knew or not. I mean, I didn't. You just blew my mind when you said that, geosciences and biology, where do they kind of overlap? That's a beautiful way to put paleontology. But not only to kind of have that realization, but to also say, I'm going to seek out this course and I'm going to see what it's all about. Were those first courses, I mean, you said they were eye-popping, but like, did it really open up the floodgates for you a little bit on the possibilities?
It did. It really opened my eyes. And one of the ways that I know that it worked really well, I had my first paleontology professor, who was a very wonderful person, was not the most dynamic lecturer I've ever had. So unlike the person who got me into geology in the first place, who I described as Father Time, was just an amazing storyteller, this other person, who was the first paleontologist I took a course from, was not so dynamic, super knowledgeable, a tremendously nice person, but not the most engaging lecturer at all. But I was so captured and excited about the material that it didn't matter the vessel by which I was learning this material. The material itself stood on its own and spoke to me. And I think I did make that connection that this material is so interesting that it doesn't even matter that the format isn't glossy and perfect. It's still speaking to me. And that kind of told me that this is something real and worth pursuing further. So the next step really was in my final year as an undergrad, an opportunity came up to do a research project and to do an honors thesis. And this was presented to me by my paleontology professor. And I was very scared about the idea of taking on hugely intimidating, like of doing a research project, of writing a thesis, bound thesis.
Right. Especially if you consider yourself dense.
Well, I'm pretty sure I'm dense in many, many ways. And certainly lacking confidence, right?
Sure. And that's what I was getting at.
I can remember, being 20, 21 and just totally unsure of myself. And of course, at that age, how much do you really know about yourself and those sorts of things? So I was scared of the idea of doing research, but I decided let's take a leap and let's try it. And that feeling of scared, but then saying yes to the opportunity. I've done this a number of times in my career since then, and it's almost always a good choice. So it's one of those little advice things that I try to pass along to my students, that if there's something that kind of scares you, but you're intrigued about it, get past the scared and do it. Because almost always it's going to advance you in some kind of way and it's going to turn out all right. Doing that research project opened my eyes to the possibility of not being a passive learner, but of actually taking charge of discovery yourself. And in the field of paleontology, it's been around for 200 years, but there's a lot that we don't know. So it's very easy, just as an undergraduate student, to be able to discover something totally brand new. And that was a big hook. So I did the research project, did the thesis, and then it was like, oh, I want to be a professor. I don't want to be, a high school biology teacher or whatever. I want to do this thing called research. That is really what's screaming at me.
So you had someone kind of clue you in that being a professor involved all the research aspect as well.
Yeah, I remember talking to my paleontology mentor, and she told me, well, so if you want to seriously get into research, here are the steps you need to take. Do the honors thesis at the undergraduate level. That allows you then to be, I guess, more ready to go into a master's program. You do a master's program for 2 years, then you're on to a PhD program for 4 years. That's the path. And you do all of those things and publish papers and, network with people. And there are jobs for professional paleontologists, but this is the route you need to take. And so that was the journey I put myself on, and it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a couple of things there that you said. I mean, that one that you obviously tell students a lot is if an opportunity shows itself, no matter how scary.
Yeah.
Like,
take it.
Take it.
I mean, there are probably ways in which you should not take scary opportunities. Sure. I'm sure those exist.
Maybe scary too. Wasn't the right word. Intimidating.
I certainly felt scared about taking on a first research project because it really did feel active as opposed to passive.
Right.
A lot of what we do when we're as students is passive learning. There's involvement. When you have to write an essay, you're involved in that process. But when you're taking on a project and you don't know how it's going to end, and it's going to be on you to come up with observations that are hopefully new, right, and you can pull something together and make a story out of it, there's a lot of unknowns and uncertainty. And I think that's what scared me a lot, was that not knowing how it's going to turn out, how much work it's going to take. And am I going to like it, or is this going to be horrible drudgery?
But that's a good thing to know,
isn't it? Yeah.
Right. I mean, like if it is a horrible drudgery, then you know that.
And that's the beauty of like independent studies or honors theses at the undergraduate level, because it'll tell you pretty quick. Do you like this? Do you not like this? Are you good at it? Mm-hmm. And also, if you do ultimately go on to graduate school, you've already made so many learning moments before you get into, a slightly higher pressure situation once you're in a master's degree program. So I don't know. I love the idea of taking a risk. And if I had not taken that risk, I'm sure there's a parallel universe where things would work out and I would be in a happy situation as well. But it wouldn't have turned out the way it did. And I'm really happy of how it turned out. And so I'm glad I took that hard right turn there.
As we kind of wrap things up here at Leif, do you have anything that you would like to get out? Is there anything interesting going on at the well, obviously there's always interesting stuff at the museum, but is there anything that you're particularly interested, programs with geosciences or the museum coming up, or even just some final words of advice to our career seekers?
Yeah, so over at the museum, we serve the campus, right? And we serve the ISU student. So ISU students get into our museum for free. So do staff and faculty. We're here for ISU. And one of my favorite things these days is bringing students on tours down into the basement so they can see the real thing. I have this love of nature, right? Obviously, from a young age, it's part of who I am, and it's really my personal mission in life is to excite other people and communicate the wonders of nature, right? And so my career also has that same mission statement, right? Being a professor is all about, especially in my discipline of geology, is teaching about the world and getting people excited and understanding the world around them. My job at the museum is exactly the same mission statement of understanding the world and nature and getting people to feel a part of the nature that they're in. So a piece of advice is if you can get your personal mission statement to align with your job mission statement, then you don't work a day of your life, because your life is in service of what you are here to do. So I love that. My favorite thing these days is to take students downstairs to the real fossils and have them put their hand on a 30,000-year-old mammoth jaw.
Whoa. Right?
Touch it, feel it, because you are making a personal connection between your hand and an ancient animal that lived here in Idaho. And when you can do that, when you give people that opportunity to receive that feeling, something happens. I think something changes inside you. that you can't measure it, but it connects us with our heritage, our place in this world. It makes us feel, at one hand, small because we're one moment of time, but also we feel large because we're connected to a greater thing than ourselves. And so, if I can allow people to make those connections, then I feel like I'm doing what I should be here for.
Beautiful. Leif, thank you so much for coming and talking today.
Absolutely.
So we're going to go down to the basement and touch those fossils now,
Let's
right?
go do it. Let's go pet a mammoth.
Sounds good. Now is our conversation with Leif Tapanila. I loved hearing about how Leif has always considered his passions along the way, taking opportunities when they present himself, and then really taking the time to reflect on that foundational interest in problem solving that really helped him move into different career pathways. If you're interested in finding more information about your career pathway, please visit our website at isu.edu/career. From the Idaho State University Career Center, I'm Mark Beaver.